The signal beneath Mount Kailash had led the expedition to only one other location on Earth: Mount Olympus. For centuries, it had been remembered as the home of the Greek gods. But the first steps beneath the mountain revealed something the ancient legends had never described. There were no temples, no royal halls, no signs that this place had ever been built for worship. Instead, every passage drew them deeper into a structure that appeared to have been engineered with impossible precision. Walls of stone concealed mechanisms unlike anything found in the ancient world. Massive interlocking systems stretched into the darkness. Silent, yet preserved as though they had been waiting for someone to return. The deeper they ventured, the more difficult it became to accept the explanations offered by history. Natural caves could not produce this level of symmetry. Ancient civilizations could not have carved chambers on this scale without leaving behind evidence of how they had done it. Yet here it was, hidden beneath one of history's greatest myths. Every new chamber raised the same unsettling question. If this wasn't a sanctuary, then what had it been built to accomplish? For generations, humanity believed sacred mountains marked the places where gods once lived. But perhaps the mountains themselves were never sacred. Perhaps something buried beneath them was. By the time the expedition reached the heart of the structure, one conclusion had become impossible to ignore. They were no longer exploring the ruins of an ancient civilization. They were standing inside the remains of an engineered system. What had first appeared to be isolated chambers slowly revealed themselves as parts of a single design. Every corridor, every mechanism, every massive stone structure belonged to something far larger than the expedition had imagined. Nothing here appeared decorative. Nothing existed without purpose. Even the smallest architectural details suggested precision, as though every chamber had once played a role within a system that was never meant to stop functioning. The deeper they explored, the more another impossible question emerged. Who could have built something on this scale? Long before recorded history, civilizations separated by thousands of years had left behind remarkable monuments. But nothing comparable to this. Nothing hidden. Nothing this sophisticated. It was becoming increasingly difficult to believe they were looking at the work of a single civilization. Instead, the architecture suggested knowledge accumulated across ages. Preserved, expanded, passed forward, as though each generation had protected only one fragment of a much greater design. Then, the expedition reached a chamber unlike anything they had encountered before. For the first time, the mountain no longer resembled a machine hidden beneath stone. It resembled a place built to observe something far beyond the earth itself. Ancient cultures often believed their gods descended from the heavens. History dismissed those stories as symbolism. Yet standing within this chamber, the distinction between mythology and memory began to disappear. The expedition had entered Olympus searching for answers. Instead, the mountain was beginning to ask questions that modern history could no longer ignore. The chamber before them was unlike anything discovered beneath Olympus. It had not been built to house machinery. It had been built to preserve knowledge. Every detail seemed to point toward the heavens, not as an object of worship, but as a destination. For the first time, The expedition considered a possibility that had never belonged to archaeology. What if the stories told by ancient civilizations were never intended to explain the gods, but to remember those who came from beyond the earth? As hidden mechanisms slowly awakened around them, another realization emerged. Olympus had never existed in isolation. It had always been connected to something else, something far beyond the mountain itself. Then, the mountain revealed what it had protected for thousands of years. An ancient map. Not of kingdoms, not of empires, but of the world itself. Across the vast stone surface, only two locations had been given extraordinary importance: Mount Olympus and Mount Kailash. Separated by continents, united by a single path. For generations, humanity believed these sacred places belonged to different civilizations, different religions, different histories. They never did. The connection had existed long before Greece, long before India, long before the civilizations that would one day build temples around them. The monuments had never been the beginning of the story. They had been reminders, left behind by those who understood the network long before recorded history began. The expedition had crossed the threshold between mythology and something far older, something deliberately hidden, waiting for humanity to discover it again. For thousands of years, the network had remained silent, not destroyed, not abandoned, waiting. As the final mechanism awakened, energy began moving through pathways that had lain dormant for ages. The expedition was no longer witnessing an ancient machine. They were witnessing an ancient system, returning to life. Whatever had once linked these sacred places was active again, not only beneath Olympus, but across the world, far beyond the mountain, hidden beneath deserts, buried beneath forests, protected beneath temples and forgotten monuments. Other terminals waited, silent, watching, connected by the same invisible design. The expedition had arrived believing they were investigating a single archaeological mystery. Instead, they had uncovered the first evidence of a planetary network, one built long before the civilizations that inherited it. No civilization had ever possessed the complete truth. The Greeks remembered Olympus. The sages of India preserved Kailash. The Egyptians protected Giza. Each civilization carried only one fragment, never realizing they were all preserving the same forgotten legacy. The greatest discovery was no longer Mount Olympus. It was the realization that Olympus had never been unique. It was only one terminal in a network that spanned the entire planet. Then, the network made its next choice. Not through chance, not through human decision, but through a design that had survived the passage of thousands of years. But Olympus was only one discovery. Somewhere beyond the horizon, other ancient terminals were still waiting. Silent, hidden, undiscovered. The mystery beneath Olympus had finally been uncovered. But somewhere beneath the sands of Egypt, another secret was already beginning to awaken. Our journey continues. In episode 3, the search had only just begun.